Hello, everyone, and welcome to the LFGHO Aave Labs workshop Analyzing Go Data. Joining us today is Matt Cole, who will be taking us through this session. And with that, I'll pass over to Matt to get the session started.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So, hey, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about analyzing Go data. My name is Matt. I am a data scientist at Avara, and welcome to the LFGHO hackathon. So, without further ado, what are we going to talk about today? So, we're going to really quickly just, intro Go and talk about what is blockchain data, how can we access it. The two types of data we're going to talk about is querying contract state and using logs for Go. And then we're going to get into how Go is not just, a single contract. It's not an island. There's a whole ecosystem in, facilitators that are, contributing to Go and how we can use data from all of these other different contracts. I think it's worth taking a minute to talk about what we're not going to cover. We're going to be connecting to a blockchain node to query some data here, and we're not going to necessarily talk about how to, select a node provider and how to connect to them necessarily. If this is all news to you, if you haven't done this before, don't worry. I've put together a couple of links at the end of how you can, connect to a node and kind of get started. So we're going to keep this pretty high level. So even if this is completely new to you, I think that you can still, absorb it. And then later, you can use some of these links to, get yourself up to speed. Likewise, we're not going to be talking about specific libraries of how to connect to nodes. Again, this is going to be pretty high level. So don't worry if you really want to use JavaScript and we're using something else, or you really want to use web3.py or web3.js or something like that, and we're using, something else. Don't stress. High level. And a lot of this information, or all of this information, will translate from one to another. And then, also, we're not going to be getting too much into like exact syntax or anything like that. So what is Go, right? I have the pleasure of being, I think, the first workshop. So, we should talk about what is Go. So Go is the Aave native stablecoin. And what's exciting about us all being here today is that, from my perspective, at least, Go is in a lot of ways what you make it. Because Go, is it the stablecoin that's powering, a really cool payments app? Is it a stablecoin that's powering some sort of savings protocol? Is it something else that I've never even thought about? That's up to you, right? You guys are building, the future of Go, and I think that's really cool. And I think what could really augment and elevate a lot of these applications is using data in a, clear and coherent way to help, create the best product possible. So what is blockchain data? Like, what is Go data? Where can we get it? All these questions, I think are really important. And I think there's two types of really important blockchain data that we're going to be talking about today. The first is contract state data. So this is any data that's stored, within a smart contract on Ethereum on our blockchain. And, we have up here in the top right here, we zoom in. This is just an Etherscan UI of us querying the balance of a particular user. So I think this is like a very common way to collect data for a particular, smart contract. And another type of data that we're going to be talking about a lot is event logs. So a lot of smart contract developers, they'll add logs to their smart contracts. So when certain important events are occurring, little pieces of data will be emitted saying, hey, this is what's happening here. A deposit is being made, a swap is being made. Here's who's making it. Here are the assets, and here's what's going on. So we're going to dive into both of these too. There's other types of blockchain data too, but we're not really going to get too much into those today. I think contract state and event logs is already a lot, so we're gonna really get into it. So what can we do with Go? How can we query Go data? So I think it's important to right off the bat note that Go is an ERC20 token. So an ERC20 token is a token that follows a particular set of standards that make it really easy for blockchain developers to interact with, ERC20 tokens generally. So Go is an ERC20 token. Other tokens that are well known like USDC are also ERC20 tokens. And that means that, applications, data applications, protocols can all interact with them in a similar way because they have a similar set or the same set of functions. So Go is a superset of an ERC20 token, right? It has a lot more functionality than a basic ERC20 token, but it does also have this kind of common set of functions that we can use to query data from. So right here, I actually included all 6 of the ERC20 specified view functions. So these are functions that just return data from the contract. And these are functions, these 6 functions are, ones that are included in all compliant ERC20 tokens. So we see them right here. This is how we can get the name, symbol, decimals, the total supply of Go, as well as, the balance of a particular user. So, let's see that in action. Like, what might that look like? We could kind of easily query, just using this one call, right? The total supply of Go, which is, might be pretty important to know. And I think even more relevant might be we can query the balance of a particular user. So that's it over here. We have this particular user. We might want to query, how much does this person have or this address have right now? And that's great because we'll always, update if we call this function in 2 hours, maybe they've sent some Go to their friends or something like that. This will always change and reflect the current state of this user. So we have that, and that's a really powerful way, kind of table stakes really to have like, an application. We should probably know how much Go a particular user has. The other type of data that I want to talk about is event logs. So as we kind of mentioned before, event logs are put into contracts by developers to flag when certain big kind of events are happening. Typically things that change the state are accompanied by a log. So the logs will be emitted and they will kind of give almost like a minimum sufficient amount of information to describe what's happening. So a very common, event for tokens might be the transfer event. So the transfer event is emitted when we have, a transfer occurring, when basically tokens are moving from one address to another. And what's cool about logs that is a little bit different than just querying state is that they're emitted at particular times. So we could actually construct like histories and actually see, basically just see the whole history. We're not seeing like the cumulative sum of all the transactions, which would be the current balance, but we can actually see discretely all of the little things that have led up to a current balance. And there's events for, many different types of events, right? Like we have, if you consider, an application like Uniswap that might be swapping Go, we can see that there might be swap events and things like that. But just as an example, we can look at, how might we find the historical balance of a particular user using events. So as we kind of talked about, whenever there's a transfer, so whenever Go moves from one address to another, a transfer event gets emitted. And this transfer event has a couple pieces of information. I kind of think about it as like the minimum sufficient amount of information to kind of describe what's happening. And it has the from field, which is where the tokens are coming from, the to field, where the tokens are going to, and the value field, how many tokens are we dealing with here? So this is kind of like, if you look at your bank account or something like that, or a credit card statement, right? It's all the money maybe flowing in or out. And that's each transaction in the credit card world, right? Is kind of each transfer event here. So how might we get historical balance? Well, we can grab all of the transfer events that relate to a particular user, and we could kind of compute, a rolling sum. So whenever there's a transfer event from that user, we know that they're, losing tokens because they're transferring them to someone. And whenever they are transferring to, we know that they're going to be, gaining balance. They're going to be increasing their balance. So we'll go grab these events and then compute the rolling balance. And then we can, do whatever we want with it. So let's look at how we actually do that. So there's a lot of ways to query event data in blockchain. There's actually some people are very passionate about a particular way of querying event data. I think for me, the easiest way to communicate how to do it is using event filters. So basically, we could kind of think about this as Ethereum has, our Ethereum node has many, many events, and we only want to look at the ones that we're interested in, right? We don't necessarily care about some random event that has occurred, a long time ago that has nothing to do with Go, right? We just want Go transfer events. So we could filter to do that. So if we look here, a lot of these, libraries that interact with our blockchain nodes, have this functionality to define an event filter, and they usually require a couple of different things. So one thing is it requires the address. So we only want Go transfer events, right? So we'll specify that, hey, the address we're interested in is Go. So only look for the, events that were emitted by the Go contract. And then we also only want to look at transfer events right now. So we could also add in here, this is like a little bit maybe strange the first time you're exposed to it, but we only want to find transfer events. We have to find the transfer event signature, which is a hash of the name of the event as well as the data types of the event, basically. We don't really need to get into it too much, but I linked to a really great blog post at the end that if you're interested in this, you could read, and it really dives into all these different intricacies of events. But yep, this will basically tell us this transfer event signature is basically the fingerprint of a transfer event. So we say, hey, we only want to look for Go events, and we only want to look for transfer events. So that's these two right here. And then just, to kind of speed things up, we could actually tell the node, hey, only look between these two blocks. So we could say, hey, only look from, between when Go was deployed, because there wouldn't be any, events that were emitted by Go before it was deployed, to the current block. So we kind of say, hey, we don't really need to worry about blocks that were produced in 2019 because Go wasn't deployed then. We could kind of skip that and only look at the most recent blocks. So if we do this, we could get our big list of locks, and we kind of turn them into, I don't want this to be like a Python lesson or anything like that, but we basically get these three fields, right? We get the from, the to, and then the value. So this is all transfer events that were sent to and from, anyone, all Go users. So we could basically filter this down to the user that we're interested in. And I just picked it's not even a user, I picked a Uniswap v3 pool. So we can look at how much Go is in this pool. And we could do exactly what we said before, right? We could say, hey, increase the balance when there's a transfer to our address, and then decrease the balance when there's a transfer from this address. So we can get something like this. So this is pretty interesting, right? This is a much more rich way to kind of see the token balance, right? Because we can see historical balances through time. And this is pretty interesting, right? Because if we are building an application, maybe this isn't something that we need, but maybe it is something we need, right? It all depends, of course, on what we're building. But this could be a really good view to, a good way to view maybe, Go held by an address over time or things like that. We could also imagine, these transfer events. We could also imagine, if we're building something like a payment protocol or something like that, or a payment app, like, it might be important to know, hey, this address that the user is trying to send to, have they sent to them before? Because if they have, right, then maybe they know that person and it's okay. But maybe if it's a new address, we need to be a little bit, more careful that they're not being scammed or something like that, so like this historical information about, who these tokens were sent to and who they were received from can be very valuable depending on, what the application is. So I think that that's something definitely that's pretty neat. So we just talked about like querying state data to get you know, the balance of a particular user, and then using logs to do pretty much the same thing to get the balance of a user. And it might be, you know, a case where you're wondering like which one should we use, you know, what's better. And a lot of Web3 UIs use the state. They query the contract state. And that's because, you know, for a single user, it could be very fast to look up the state of that particular user. And also, it, you know, you're assured it's real time and it's actually very literally what the contract says the balance is, right? Like if in some ways the contract is the truth, right? So if the contract says, hey, the balance of this user is, you know, X, like you can be pretty sure that it's X. But the thing about querying the contract state is we don't, you know, get anything historical, right? We're just very much, you know, point in time right now. What's the balance of this user? So if it is important to, you know, look at you know, historical data, you know, that's sometimes where logs can be of use. And not just historical balance data, right? Like I was saying before, maybe we're interested in, you know, knowing the history of like who a particular address has sent to and who they've received from. If that's important too, you know, we can use logs to kind of get that data as well. Maybe, you know, a bit out of the scope of this presentation, but, you know, if we're storing logs, you know, it doesn't necessarily make sense to always be querying our nodes. You know, these are things that we can, you know, store in a tabular table in, you know, a database or something like that for easier retrieval. But I definitely wanted to expose you to logs and querying state data as both different options. So everything we talked about so far has been just querying the Go contract, which is great. And I think that there's a lot of really good data there. But the truth is, you know, Go is not a single contract. The Go token is, but Go, you know, the Go ecosystem, which when I hear Go, I think the Go ecosystem really is so much more than that, right? So Go is, you know, a big part of DeFi. It's, you know, in a lot of different decentralized exchange pools. You know, it's being used for payments. People are holding it, right? It's being used outside of the ecosystem. And then there's this entire, you know, facilitator, you know, very interesting mechanisms where facilitators are creating Go and really controlling the supply. And I think that, you know, to really understand Go is to kind of really understand how all these pieces play together. And I think you'll be getting exposed to, you know, the facilitators like much more in the near future. So I'm not going to go into them too much, but I think the important thing, you know, right here, we're going to talk about them a little bit, of course, but the important thing here is, right, that the facilitators are the contracts that actually, you know, you can create Go with, right? So you can actually, you know, if you want Go, you could actually mint Go using the Aave v3 Ethereum facilitator. And this facilitator has a lot of different parts, right? It's part of Aave, which is a very elegant protocol, very elegant, but there's, you know, a few pieces to it too. It's not just a very, you know, extremely simple protocol too, right? We have pool contracts, debt tokens, oracles, you know, even governance is all a very, very important part of the Aave protocol and of this facilitator too, right? So we want to know, you know, what facilitators are available to Go, right? And that's a function as well that we have within Go, right? So we can, you know, figure out what facilitators there are for Go, and then we could actually see a very important part of the Go kind of risk mechanism is understanding how much Go each of these facilitators are allowed to mint or create. So we actually see here on this bottom screenshot that the Aave v3 Ethereum pool has a bucket capacity of 100 million. So that means that Go is saying, the Go contract says, hey, we permit you to mint up to 100 million. And currently there's about 34.7 million, which is the same number that we saw before, right? When we queried the total supply of Go. So we'll spend a quick a minute or two on the Aave v3 Ethereum facilitator. So what is this facilitator? So the very, very short version of the Aave v3 Ethereum facilitator is we can mint Go using this facilitator in an over-collateralized manner. So that means that we can supply assets to Aave, and then we could mint against that collateral. So typically, maybe we can supply, $2 worth of ETH, and then maybe we can borrow, $1 worth of one Go. And right now, it's actually the only way, I think why it's so important, is the only way to obtain persistent Go, so Go that you could actually have in your wallet, is through the Aave v3 Ethereum facilitator. So if we're building any protocol or any, interface that kind of gives information about Go, or maybe is informing a user on, if they want to borrow Go or otherwise obtain it, it might actually be pretty important to really understand, Aave v3 just as a whole, but also the Aave v3 data, because there's a lot of, moving parts with Aave, and it might be important to kind of inform, like, is this a good financial decision for a user, to understand, how much yield or, if I deposit to Aave, how much yield am I going to get? What's the borrow rate, or what's the fee to maybe mint Go and hold on to that debt? These are all questions that are very important. So, I put down here, some that I was just thinking of, but there's many more. Like, part of this whole thing, right, I think, is to understand what is important for your, application, what data you might need for your application. But here's a couple that, I could imagine might be important, like which assets can be used as collateral, right? You can't necessarily use any token as collateral. So what assets can be used as collateral? How much Go can be borrowed, right? There might be a cap on the amount of Go that can be borrowed. It might also be important to know that. What's the Go rate? And how much interest is the protocol offering for the collateral, right? These are all things that might be, pretty important to make an informed decision. So this is the Aave v3 Ethereum front end, right? And we'll actually notice that they did, this is a great UI. It has all of the information that that we were just talking about, right? It has, the supply rates for different collaterals. It's a list, I cut it off, of course, but there's a list of all the collaterals that you could supply. So this is like a really great way to, see how, all the information we need to make a decision on if minting Go is right for us. So in order to get all this data, though, right, there's a lot of contracts we might be needing to interact with, right? We might need to interact with the Ethereum, v3 Ethereum pool contract to get some data on, the rates of all these, assets and what assets are allowed. We might need to, hook into oracles to see, the price of all these assets, right? There's a lot of things kind of going on. But luckily, the Aave, interface is actually using a really nice helper contract that I just think could be really good for some of your projects, maybe, because it collects all of this data into one spot. So maybe this is like, a way to kind of, if you need extra data, of course you can grab it, but maybe you can take a look at this if you're building a UI with some of your Aave data. I think this might be like the 80-20 of the presentation is like, hey, like here's a, a contract that has a lot of relevant data for you. So if we go on over here, there's two key functions. And again, I know we're going pretty fast, but this data or this information, it's in the documentation, and I have some links to it in the repo that I'm going to share at the end. So definitely take a look at that if you're interested in using more. But we have two great functions. One gets really detailed reserve data, and the other gets really detailed user position data. Basically, we call them user reserve data. So we could see here, again, it's not, it's not a Python class or anything like that, but if we just call get user or get reserves data, we get a ton of data on all of the reserves. And we could really use this to, for a ton of different use cases. But, we can easily get, if we're curious, how much of an asset can I supply? How much can I borrow against a particular asset? It's all kind of collected here. The team did a great job putting this together. So this is a really great way to see, a list of assets and a lot of information about them, including the current rates and, how much is available to borrow. So I definitely recommend taking a look at this. And again, don't worry, all this code and everything like that is also in the link. So I hope no one's like, trying to write this down or anything like that. So in summary, we can get a ton of data from the state of our contracts, like just in that example right there. It's a very powerful way to get the current data from Go. And then events can help us understand a little bit more, contextualize a little bit more data, right? We can get historical data and we can see the little pieces that maybe we lose when we just look at these almost like summarized versions on the contract. And then maybe this is the main point, right? Like Go is more than just an ERC20 token. Go is so much more than just one token, right? Go is an entire ecosystem. And of course, so is Go Data. So I think it's really important to keep all of that in mind as we're building our projects. I think the facilitators and the wider DeFi ecosystem is just a key part of Go. So yeah, thanks so much. So that was the presentation. Here is this link. You'll find, I think, two main files in this repo. One is just a README that has some links in it if you're interested in learning more. And then the other one is just a Jupyter notebook with some of the codes. You should be able to run that and do everything we did today if you want to. And yeah, and here's where you can find me on X and Lens. And I'm happy to, I know we have a couple minutes. I'm happy to answer any. Oh my gosh, we have the chat here. Okay, let's see.
Yeah, it's there was one question earlier on that was already addressed, and then Tommy had asked, is there a way to query the historical borrows lens of an address?
Yes, we want to query the historical borrows. That's a great question. Yeah, so that we can use with events as well. The Aave pool contract has an event called borrow, and that will actually give us, who borrowed. It's actually a bit more complicated of an event. There's many more fields, but basically it'll tell us who borrowed, what asset was borrowed, and how much that asset was borrowed, right? So that gives us pretty good information.
Awesome. And then Vincent had asked, can we get a proper documentation? Most documentation on ETH Global is empty. I think this might be referring to maybe some of the resources I think the team was updating. So Vincent, if you probably go back and check on the website, then all those resources should be updated. But Matt, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, although I'm not really sure. It's kind of a broad question.
The link is, maybe I did a type. It should be LF. Okay, here it is. So I don't know if I maybe did a typo, but it should be LFG. Okay, cool. And then the other question was, I see something cross-chain bridging. There's no like Aave like cross-chain bridging for Go yet, but that could be something that maybe you look into for the project.
There's Nandi BA asked about multi-blockchain with implementation on multiple blockchain, chain, and governance contracts. Go is currently on Ethereum, but it was created as Aave to have multiple implementation who share the same orchestrator contract.
If I understand this question correctly, this might be about like multi-chain Go, which is something that Go right now is only on Ethereum basically. But yeah, I mean, I could imagine, right? A facilitator is Aave v3 Ethereum as a facilitator. It might not be that hard to imagine that maybe Arbitrum v3 could be a facilitator in the future, right? And that would be a different maybe contract. I'm not actually sure how that would work, but that could be something that happens. And then is querying event similar as querying a state on a blockchain? So they're actually different. So like actually logs, event logs are not stored like literally on the blockchain. Usually the nodes kind of store them. So they are actually a bit different. they are a bit different. If you're interested in logs, I definitely recommend the blog post. I put it in the notes. That could be, yeah, a really great read for you. Bridged asset. I don't know the rules, but a cross bridge go sounds pretty cool to me.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's totally that's fair game. I mean, if you can do it, go for it.
yeah, that sounds good to me too. Um, is testnet go? Maybe someone else can answer what testnet, but I think maybe that is true. Cool. Okay, awesome. I think that's all the questions. For creating a new facilitator. I don't, maybe the testnet has different governance. I'm not sure how that would work for creating a new facilitator, but I think that there might be a workaround.
This is a long one. And yeah, we'll probably maybe end it in about 2 minutes. So this might be the last question.
Okay, perfect.
And for folks,
Um,
if you have other questions, definitely once this ends, you can always drop them in the partner Discord channel as well. And some of the mentors will be able to address them too if you have a question that we weren't able to address in time.
yes, this question about borrowing. Yeah, basically, it might sound a little bit strange, but yeah, if you borrow 100 Go and say you're the only person that borrows Go, at the end of 1 year, right, you would owe more Go than you borrowed. And there actually wouldn't be that much Go in existence, right? Um, that might sound weird and maybe concerning, but the idea would be that if that were the case, right, which it isn't, then the price of Go would probably go up, and then people would borrow Go to kind of arbitrage that difference, right? And then there would be much more Go. So like I think it's in a vacuum, this sounds very, very strange, but the Go peg would kind of facilitate minting more Go. So I think that's a good question that maybe deserves a lot more of an answer than I gave. But yeah. Um, and yeah, Aave V3 is the only facilitator as well as the Aave, the Flash Mint facilitator.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for attending, and thank you, Matt, for the great presentation. And yeah, like I said, if you have questions still, please send them into the partner channels on Discord. And if you haven't done so already, connect your Hacker Dashboard to Discord too. But yeah, we look forward to continuing the rest of the day. Don't forget opening ceremony and summit. It starts in a couple of hours, and there will be more workshops throughout the day as well. So cheers all. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.